Hi, my name is Dale Mazzarella. I'm a Fly Fishers International Master Casting Instructor, a longtime Wyoming fishing guide, and an award-winning coach and educator. I've put together this video series that I hope will help you become a better fisherman, catch a lot more fish, and I hope you enjoy it. So enjoy yourself, have a good time, and let me know what you think. Today we're going to discuss tracking. So first off, let's define tracking. Tracking is the degree to which our fly line, and therefore our rod tip, has caused the fly line to travel in a straight line. A lot of people refer to that as good tracking if we have a perfectly straight or nearly straight fly line, and that is supposed to be good tracking, but I'm not sure I agree with that. It's like loops. I'm not sure that a narrow loop is absolutely a good loop. It's a good loop sometimes, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes we want a big loop. It's the same thing with tracking. We often, if we want to go for distance, if we want accuracy, if we want to cast into the wind, we need tracking that causes a straight line. But there are times we don't want a straight line rod tip path when we're doing a curve cast or some of the other kinds of casts where we're swinging our rod around. So we're going to show you those, but keep in mind that the biggest thing that I think we ought to know about tracking is what causes various kinds of tracking paths and what the implications are, and how do we control our rod tips so we can make the tracking path that gets our fly to our target in the best way possible. And that's really the goal when you're trying to fish. Let's talk about three what you see as typical examples of tracking variance in an actual casting situation or fishing situation. The first is, like we talked about earlier, straight line rod tip path. That means we're going to create as straight a line of rod tip path as we can. Our back cast is straight and our forward cast is straight, and they're lined up 180 degrees to each other. That's going to create the most efficient loop. So that's one kind of tracking. The second kind of tracking we're going to see is when we do things like a constant tension cast. We swing the rod around on purpose to create a big wide loop so that our flies don't hit themselves, or we have big heavy lines and we don't, or big flies or heavy sink tip lines, and we want to make sure that they don't bounce at the end and shock our rod. We keep the fly in motion the entire time. So this is a common kind of casting stroke that doesn't cause a straight line, but it's not necessarily a casting error if that's what you mean to do. The third one is oftentimes we see people when they make a cast in the front, they turn their wrist. If you turn your wrist just a little bit at the end of your forward cast, your line is going to swing to the left, and you're going to see that quite frequently. I see that a lot, and I'll see it in my own cast if I'm not careful. Just a little bit of a tick to the left and your leader is going to swing to the left. So what happens is you've got a leader that swings to the left, and if you're a left-handed caster, your leader will swing to the right. Both those two things, if you're trying to do a curve cast, that's pretty good. That's what you want to do. But if you're trying to make a straight line cast into a wind, let's say, or accurate cast, that's not a good cast. So again, those are three things that you see quite commonly done when people are fishing. One of the most common ones you see that's related to this is people come back, but they swing their rod. They just dip their hand a little bit, their wrist turns, and we're going to show you a drill in a second. But that's very common, and what that means is that your back cast is not straight and it's not efficient, and if you've got a tailwind or you're trying to cast long distances, that isn't going to work. Let's review what we need to have straight line tracking. A couple of things. Number one, we need parallel loops in all planes. So this is a parallel loop. You can see it's still parallel here. It's parallel here. What if it does this? It's not parallel. What if it does this? It's not parallel. Those are not parallel loops. The other thing that doesn't make a parallel loop is what if my top leg does that? That's not parallel. What if my bottom leg sags? That's not parallel. I can't do it, but what if my top leg does this? That's not parallel. And the other thing is, you'll notice where we need is have the forward and back casts in 180 degrees. Because if they're not in 180 degrees, what you end up with is this. This one here is going back, and this one here is going forward, and that's going to cause a problem. So if we want straight line tracking, we need to have a straight line rod tip path forward and back, and we also need 180 degrees between the forward and the back loops. We need parallel loops in all planes at all times. One drill I like to have people do, and it's really pretty common, a lot of people have people do this drill. I like a rod stick for this, or a yardstick for this drill, because it's long enough that, remember, when you have a 9-foot lever, any little mistake down here or any little motion down here is going to take, that rod tip is going to have a pretty dramatic effect as a result of the motion in your hand. So the longer you can have as a lever when you're doing this drill, the better off you're going to be. Even in a normal house, certainly a yardstick isn't going to hit the ceiling. So I call this the mirror or wall drill. You get your yardstick and you stand next to the wall in front of the mirror, or just the mirror if you want to, and what you try to do is you try to go straight back and forth in a straight line. If your rod does this, if you're close to the wall, you're going to hit the wall. That is not going to be a straight line rod tip path. So what you're trying to do is train yourself to, if you need to, you want to cast far, you want to cast into a tailwind with a back cast, you need a nice tight back cast loop, which means a straight line rod tip path. So you're going to do this drill back and forth with the mirror. You can do it over here if you want to. It's the same drill. The difference is you don't want to be dipping it. Same thing on the off shoulder. You can do it the off shoulder with a wall over here. If you dip it, you're probably going to hit the wall. So practice that. One thing I think about, and when you're actually casting, you can use this. Watch your hand. If your hand turns or twists during the course of a casting stroke, think about your hand being in a trough. It's back and forth in a trough right here. If that hand moves out of the trough on the back cast and a forward cast, 180 degrees to each other, or if the hand pivots either in a back cast, at any point in the back cast or the forward cast, you're going to have a non-straight line rod tip path, which is going to cause tracking that isn't a straight line. Another one is, let's say I come back like this. I come back like this, my perfectly straight rod tip path, back. And then I go forward like this. So back here and forward here. I'm going to have all kinds of problems, even though each casting stroke was a straight line casting stroke, because I broke the 180-degree rule. If I make one cast, play like you're looking at this from the sky. I make one cast, a back cast in this direction and a forward cast in this direction, I'm going to have a horrible loop. I could have a tailing loop. I could have all kinds of bad things happen. So this is what we really want on the forward and the back cast, both in the horizontal and the vertical plane, if we're interested in creating a nice straight line rod tip path. So a straight line rod tip path can happen in the transition between good back cast, and then I do this. I'd go this, good forward cast. The problem is this transition was less than 180 degrees, so that will cause some problems too. So those are good little drill. I do that a lot. I do that a bunch myself. I find that I have a really hard time maintaining really good straight line rod tip path tracking. And I need to do these drills every 2 or 3 weeks. I try to do this drill. You can do this one in house just when you're brushing your teeth. So it can be very valuable. Next, we're going to go to a drill on the grass, a horizontal drill to talk about horizontal tracking. And then we're going to go to a wall, a Kmart wall, or can't remember where it is anyway, and we're going to work on some tracking up against the wall with a rod. What we're going to do now is a drill that I think is a pretty important drill, and all we're doing is the grass drill or the line drill that we did in Chapter 1. So what we're doing is we're just taking our rod and we're swinging it parallel to the ground, and we're trying to keep our rod tip like it's on a table or on a taut rope, straight line rod tip path. If we swing it up and down, we'll hit the fly will hit the grass. If we use enough speed, enough acceleration, and we have a nice straight rod tip path, we can be parallel to the ground right here and not hit the ground. So the object is to play with a rod tip path that's in a straight line in the horizontal plane. You can then just go ahead and go up and do the same thing here, and then eventually we can get to vertical when we get on the side of the building. But right now, this is what we're trying to do. Those are nice, I think, pretty parallel loops. They're also, the rod tip you saw should have been almost parallel to the ground, traveling in a straight line. The loop should have had very little sag in the fly leg, and that would have been caused by gravity. So that drill is really important. If you bounce your rod tip up and down on the way, even a little bit of a flick, what you're going to see is you're going to get this weird loop, and that's going to show up in your cast. Now there may be times you want to do that. I'll do that sometimes to get underneath a bush. But I don't do that on purpose, especially if I want to cast nice, fast, straight loops. So play with this, play with the rod tip, play with the different kinds of what happens to loops as your rod tip adjusts. I think that's a really neat thing to do. So now we're going to go to the building, and we're going to work on the casting drill up against the building, the track drill up against the building. So what we're going to do is show you the last drill, which I think is super important, and we may be interrupted by a car going by, but we're going to just keep on going because it's just too fragmented if we don't. This is a target wall. You can use the back of a Walmart wall, Sears, whatever you can find. I don't even have a line on this rod right now, and the reason I don't is because I found that these buildings are hard to see the line. You need a really dark building, and the line just disappears anyway, but you'll get an idea, and I'll try to describe what we're going to do. So here I am, I've got my back turned to you, but here's what we're going to be doing. We're just casting along this wall. We're going to try to get closer and closer and closer without hitting it. It should go forward and back without hitting the wall. If, however, my rod does this, you can see my rod moves to the side a little bit on the way back, and you can hear it scrape the wall, probably through my microphone. That means that you've got a tracking error. So what we want to do is just go straight. And by the same token, if on the way forward, you curve your fly rod out, you're going to get a fly line to hit the wall too. So if you hear that wall hit, you know that you've had a tracking error. And all you're going to do is do this, trying to stay as straight as you can, and then you can move out and do the same thing. Again, you can still have a tracking error way out here. If I swing the rod in, I want to have that rod tip stay equidistant from that wall the entire time. So this would be pretty good tracking. But if you don't have good tracking, you're going to know it right away because your rod tip is going to hit the wall, or what's going to happen is, even if you don't hit the wall, just a little dip in and your fly line will smack against the wall. A little dip out and your fly line will smack the wall here. So those are the two most common kinds of things. But man, I get up against this thing about once a month and just practice. So I hope this video helped at least explain a couple of things about tracking, what we mean by tracking, why tracking, or at least the awareness of tracking is important, and a couple of drills that might help you. So think about tracking, especially if you're interested in really straight line rod tip. Straight line tracking is going to help you with your distance. It's going to help you with accuracy. It's going to tighten up your loops and make that part of casting much better.